Something that I've noticed about non-duality is that to speak about it, it can only be spoken about from the perspective of nothing. It can only be spoken about by a speaker, really, or from nothing. Because when I'm asked what it is, and I try to explain it from air, it comes out really wrong. And you know. But other times I can explain it, but it'll come out from a different place. It's funny.
It's possible. I don't know. It's possible that might be to do with the mind of the apparent person that you're communicating with.
It's already rejecting it.
Because I think if there's any resistance there, that tends to create a different energy, and if there's an acceptance, that creates a different energy. So it could be to do with that.
I think it is,
yeah. But I mean, it goes without saying that words can't touch this. And in a way, we should all go without saying it. Full stop. But, I mean, there are all sorts of sayings in various non-dual traditions and no-self traditions about this. I mean, most of them are either kind of pompous or crap, but or self-destructive, like those who know do not speak, those who speak do not learn. Which kind of sounds good in a glib sort of way. Of course, it does mean that everything ever said is completely illegitimate, no matter who said it. But, yeah.
I found it often feels like like you were saying, when I try to talk to people about this stuff, as soon as I start saying something, I keep saying to myself, oh, well, that's wrong, no, that's not, that's wrong.
Yeah. It's very easy to trip ourselves up because everything that we say about this is, in a way, wrong. It's just the closest. Sometimes we can get closer to it, sometimes we're a long, long way away from it in what we say, but we can never get it, of course. Yeah. If you're interested in communicating about this and you feel like there's some kind of block there, it's probably a good idea to write it down, and that might get us through the blocks. Yeah. But I think with most people out there, the question arises: well, why on earth would you want to talk to anyone about non-duality? Because to most people out there, it's a kind of insult in a way. I mean, it is, denial of the self and of everything that goes with that. Our whole kind of, I'm not quite sure what phrase to go for. I mean, it's much more than our intellectual structure. It's like our whole. There isn't a phrase big enough in English for this. I'm tempted to use the German phrase Weltanschauung. Our whole attitude to life is so determined by and dependent on this one central fact that everybody knows, that there is a self, and that self has something incredibly precious called free will and choice and responsibility, but the core of that is free will. Everything rests on that. Our legal systems rest on it, nearly all of our philosophical systems rest on that, our moral systems, our ideas of what is virtuous and what is vice and good and bad and good and evil and all of this stuff, even for the most secular person, even for someone who might totally reject all religious stories of any kind whatsoever. It cannot be avoided, and so it's like an insult to the central core that everything else is built on, to suggest that the self is an illusion or a false self or unreal or however we want to put it. It's no wonder people can get very angry about this very quickly. Yeah. I mean, even to deny the existence of free will, to posit that, well, there's a self, that even the denial of free will can make people very, very angry for the same reason, because all our kind of I'll use the phrase, a very bad phrase, but I'll use the phrase metaphysical structures. All our metaphysical structures about what's valuable and how the world works and so on, built on that central idea that freedom to choose, good and evil, wisdom and folly, duty or abandonment of duty, responsibility or irresponsibility, all of these rest on that central idea that there is such a thing as free will, and somebody who exercises it. The notion of free will doesn't even make sense without the notion of someone who exercises it.
For me, I feel I want to talk about it because there's a sense of, even if, let's say, there's a sense of a me maybe perhaps still here, I don't know, but there's a sense of freedom, and it's like that sense of freedom, even if it's very difficult to describe that, whatever it is. It's so intangible and ungraspable, and but then there's this feeling of wanting to communicate it, but not being able to. Probably because I don't know why.
I think where there is a receptivity to that,
Yeah.
then it can be absolutely beautiful. It can be gorgeous to communicate about it.
Mm.
And you put your finger on something which is utterly core to this. I think we spent a lot of time talking about this last month, but we haven't really talked about it this month. Absolutely, this is freedom. What we are talking about here is freedom. The only freedom. And when people hear the word freedom, unless they're kind of reasonably philosophically sophisticated, they tend to think of freedom in terms of, well, what can I do with my freedom? You know, freedom is about, you know, how free am I to do certain things and not to do certain other things. And so this is the other kind of freedom. This is not freedom to do anything. It's freedom from. You know, it's freedom from the burden of being a person. It's the seeing that, you know, I am not free to do anything. Well, I'm not free not to do anything because I don't exist. You know, the freedom to just dissolves in this. But what is seen is, you know, this is absolute, this is freedom from the tyranny of the self, which is the only real freedom. It's the only freedom which is actually possible. You know, all other freedoms are imprisonment compared to this. I mean, we can be in a prison and we can free ourselves from that prison. Then we'll be in a bigger prison. And we can free ourselves from that prison, then we'll be in a bigger prison, which is fine, there's nothing wrong with that. But in a sense, that is the endeavour of, let's say psychotherapy, or self-development, or spiritual improvement, or even maybe salvation through, you know, the love of God, or whatever. All of these can provide, may provide, an increase in our freedom, in the sense that we get out of a small freedom into a bigger freedom. I mean, if I'm in quite a small prison, encased in walls, I don't want to get too psychotherapeutic here, but encased in walls of, let's say, lack of resentment and anger towards my parents and lack of forgiveness to my parents and my 3 previous ex-wives, by the way, that is not autobiographical, etc., etc., etc. You know, then it can be genuinely freeing to go through some good psychotherapy, or maybe to go through some good Buddhism, or through some good Sufism, or something else like that, some good mindfulness, some good meditation, any of these things, and release some of that anger, resentment, unforgiveness, whatever it might be, and then I'm free compared to how I was before. I am free of my resentment towards my parents, which is freedom compared to how I was before, but I'm simply in a bigger prison. What we're talking about here is the only real freedom, which is to see not that there is no prison, but there is no person who could be in a prison. I mean, even the best and the most well-meaning psychotherapeutic paths, philosophical paths, spiritual paths, and even religious paths are kind of, in a way, dedicated to us seeing you know, that the prison we think we're in is not the prison that we believe it to be, which is great, it's fine, it's therapeutic, maybe sometimes therapeutic, but in a way it doesn't cut it. The true freedom is the freedom of seeing that there is no one in the prison. It doesn't matter whether it's a prison or not, because there's no one in it. So this is the only possible freedom. And it's interesting, I mean, I find it interesting culturally, because of course non-duality has become such a big thing over the last 10 or 15 years. And it's kind of, I find it quite interesting watching, I'm going to use the phrase some of us trying to kind of create another prison out of that. You know, in other words, take non-duality and turn it into another path. You know, with rules and regulations about what you must and mustn't do. So, you know, and then you get, wherever you have teachings, you have a prison. So then you get teachings, non-duality teachings, that you must, well, at an extreme, for example, I've quoted this before, you must want this more than life itself, or you can't have it. Which is lovely in a way. It's terribly dramatic, isn't it? It's almost slightly romantic, really. And of course it's a prison. It's a prison of effort.
So there can't be any prescriptions then?
No.
Well, not one single prescription?
No.
Nothing?
Of course there can be, and there are dozens and dozens, possibly hundreds of them, and none of them have any purchase. Of course not. This is absolute freedom. How can there be any prescriptions? This is a sad fact of life, because if there were prescriptions, we could write them down or bottle them and sell them and make lots and lots of money. But there aren't. But there are plenty of apparent prescriptions. So, you know, it's kind of the nature of the human mind. There's plenty of offers of prescriptions out there. But of course none of them have any purchase. Of course not. How could they? Non-duality is freedom. It's freedom from prescriptions, it's freedom from doctrines, it's freedom from teachers, it's freedom from paths and practices, it's just freedom. And within that freedom, obviously any of those may arise, and that's fine too. It's freedom from morality, it's freedom from virtue, it's freedom from saints, it's freedom from charlatans, and any or all of those may and probably do arise. This is freedom. But the confusion for the mind is the mind tends to think of that in terms of permissiveness. You know, I now have permission to do things and so forth. I mean, one of the common kind of extreme questions that I answered, I think there's a kind of case of this right at the beginning of my second book, is, you know, somebody sitting in an audience like this and saying, so what you're saying is I can go out and murder people if I want to. You see, so the mind takes this idea of freedom and says, okay, this is about my freedom to do things, in this particular case, to do whatever I want. Well, there are all sorts of answers that can be made to that, but really the core answer, the core thing to say is that isn't what is meant by freedom here. This is not about freedom to do stuff. Who, after all, would choose to do that? It's about freedom from the tyranny of the self. You isn't real. What that thinks of as you, what this thinks of conventionally as me, as you, is an appearance. Kind of illusion. A very convincing illusion until it isn't.
In narration, does that illusion disappear completely, or is it seen to be, it carries on but it's seen to be what it is?
Well, unless there's physical death, the character carries on.
But when you say a character, I'm always a little bit confused. When you say the character, do you separate the character from what you call self, or is that the same thing?
So what I'd say is, and I mean there's no good way of talking about it, but what I'd say is, let's sort of talk about this conventionally in terms of like time unfolding in a person's life, biographical. So there's a person, and then let's say there is the disappearance of the person. Let's make that a total, let's make that the seeing of nothing and everything, as I was talking about it before tea. Okay, so there's a person. Let's go back to the Stargate. Then the person somehow finds themselves in the Stargate, and the person drops. And then the other side of the Stargate, or the other side of the park, or the other side of the railway station, or in Nathan's case, the other side of cycling down the country lane. What comes out? Well, we can use whatever word we like, but to go on saying a person would be confusing because a radical change has taken place. So sometimes, just because we have to use language, I call what comes out of the other side of the park, the cycle track, the railway station, or the Stargate, a character. So person, seeing nothing and everything, let's say. And then, unless physical death happens at that moment, what goes on is a character. And that character will have many characteristics in common with the person that existed before, or that appeared to exist before. They may be radically changed, so there may be many characteristics that are not the same, but there will almost certainly be many characteristics that are. So to the casual observer, there may be no difference. Why should there be? But, you see, it depends what kind of characteristic we're talking about. The person liked porridge for breakfast, the character liked porridge for breakfast, the person liked brown shoes, the character liked brown shoes, the person was a member of a guru cult. The character probably isn't a member. I mean, I'm going out on a limb because they may be, but it's not very likely. In the seeing of nothing and everything, it's quite likely that whatever contributed to the desire to be a member of a guru cult will probably have gone bang, probably have dissipated.
Right.
So when it comes to characteristics like that, there's quite likely to be a huge shift, which of course could then disturb the life that is then lived in terms of friends and family who don't perhaps like the changes, the transformation that's taken place. But that's the danger of any transformation. You go into good psychotherapy, it's quite likely to transform you in some ways, and it's also quite likely that the people in your life will not like that because it will disturb things.
So I'm tempted to ask the question, well, what's the difference? But so
the difference between?
Well, so I understand that the characteristics, say for example, they don't change and they carry on as normal, say,
Some probably will.
Right, and then some might fall away over time or immediately.
Yeah.
So right now there's a sensation of sitting on a chair, and there's maybe thoughts, feelings, etc.
Yeah.
And so the person within that, I guess there's some sense of it being, I'm experiencing that. Is that thing of, I'm experiencing that, is that what goes? Do you know what I mean? So,
I do know what you mean.
Or is that, I'm experiencing that, seem to be just another thing?
It seems to you pose an either-or question there, and I think the answer is yes to both of those. It could be one or the other, or both. So what tends, if there is a kind of an event, which there doesn't have to be, if there is, if you like, a sudden and very notable event, there tends to be a period of time in which there may be no sense whatsoever of spatial existence there.
So no sense of location?
No sense of location. So sometimes I say that for the person there's a sense of both contraction and location, like I'm located in a space, but there's a feeling of contraction. In an event such as we're talking about, both of those can disappear, so there's no sense of contraction and also no sense at all of location. That is quite literally indescribable,
Right.
because words can't describe that.
Yeah.
What tends to happen is that the sense of location either gradually or suddenly returns, but the sense of contraction doesn't. So after a period of time, in speaking conventionally, there is once again a sense that there's a kind of a sort of location.
What's the
That may
difference?
be kind of more fuzzy and more evanescent and less definite and so forth, but probably it will return. It doesn't have to,
No.
but probably it will.
What's the difference then between sense of location and sense of contraction?
Right, so sense of...
Sorry to be arsey.
No, you're not at all being arsy. You're asking very natural questions. The sense of contraction. The problem with describing this is, I think, that for the one who's always felt themselves to be a person, they don't notice the sense of contraction because it's always been
Yeah,
there.
having a hand and shoulder from birth.
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the metaphor I often use is like having an over-tight shoe. And it's always been there, so you take that feeling as natural, you never notice it or think about it consciously. But it's kind of there, draining your energy and drawing your attention, but unconsciously. Now, if suddenly that tightness is taken away, suddenly that shoe's taken away, or an over-tight corset, which is suddenly taken away, so for the first time you can breathe freely,
Yeah.
it's only at that point that you recognise that there was a constriction. So contraction can be like that. It's like I could describe it as like a tightness, a strain, a stress in the psychophysical organism, but it's not felt as such because it's always been there.
Okay.
Now, if that goes bang,
Yeah.
even for a split second,
Yeah.
then it's noticed.
Okay.
And that's part of the freedom I'm talking about. Freedom from what? Freedom from contraction. Freedom from that kind of stress that being separate imposes on us in a way.
Okay.
So what I would say, and I mean this is very clumsy because words are very clumsy, but it's the closest I can get to it, is that if there is this seeing of nothing and everything, then that sense of contraction tends to just go and not come back. The sense of localization, which is, somehow there is an awareness which is kind of vaguely in this the same sort of place as the physical body, that can also go, but that does tend to return after a while. I mean, I'm sure there may be cases where it doesn't, but I think those are rare. I don't know.
So what notices the sense that the contraction's no longer there? Because it's known somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. It's known very clearly.
But it's not the person, that if the end of contraction is the end of the person.
Yeah, but don't forget that the person who seemed to be noticing everything was always an illusion.
Okay.
So what notices that the sense of contraction is no longer there is the same thing as noticing everything when there seems to be a person.
I see.
And it's an unsatisfactory answer, but it's still probably the best one to say what notices it is oneness. Oneness itself notices that.
Okay, alright.
I mean, we could use words like awareness notices it, but that brings in other difficulties, so it's probably best to leave that aside.
So what's noticing right now that I'm sitting on a chair is misconstrued to be me noticing it, but actually it's...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because the sensation or the feeling or however it's manifesting, there is a me that notices that I'm sitting on this chair is a full sense.
Okay.
In any case, so however much it might seem that there is a me noticing that, actually it's simply oneness doing its thing, we could say.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, that really clears that up. Massive.
So linguistically, could we say that there is awareness of sitting on a chair,
Yeah.
rather than I am aware of sitting on a chair.
Yeah.
I am aware of sitting on a chair.
Yeah. It's so many aspects of our culture, I might be saying to say all aspects of our culture, but so many aspects of our culture kind of construct themselves in a way to support this idea that there is an autonomous, responsible separate person in there, and of course the way our grammar is constructed reinforces that all the time. You know, I am sitting on a chair, I am happy, but as somebody, I can't remember who, I wish I could, because I'd love to give them the authority of having said this, because I think it's a brilliant thing to say, and I wish I'd thought of it. You know, and the sentence "I am happy," or substitute "I am sitting on a chair" if you like, the word "I" in the sentence "I am happy" has exactly the same force and meaning as the word "it" in the sentence "it is raining." We naturally think in these terms. As you could say, you know, our brains or our minds structure language, and then language in return structures our brains or our minds. It's a kind of feedback loop, if you like. So, "it is raining" seems like a colossally natural thing to say, and I'm sure that many of us have said it many times, and that almost none of us have thought of what it is that we're saying, but it's nonsense. It is raining. What is the it that is raining? There isn't an it which is raining. It's just ridiculous. The sentence "it is raining" means rain is falling. Or
It would
rain
sound
is
really weird
happening.
if we all just went "rain is happening," wouldn't we?
Well, it would sound
be like
quite-
Handmaid's Tale or something.
well, it would sound quite weird for a little while, then we'd all get used to it.
Right,
Then it would sound,
yeah.
but the point I'm making is, you know, "it is raining, I am sitting on a chair." "It is raining" means rain is happening. "I'm sitting on a chair" means sitting on a chair is happening. It's such a fundamental, it's only linguistic, but it encourages us to make a fundamental mistake. And if you think about it, I don't want to get too philosophical here, but how much of Western philosophy is based on, not just on Descartes, but the one very short sentences of Descartes, which is the only one that nearly all of us know, and which is posited as, you know, Descartes starts by trying to get rid of all doubt and going right back to the most simple, basic thing that he could possibly know. And this has been followed for hundreds of years in Western philosophy, in spite of the fact that it is clearly and obviously, right from the get-go, completely wrong. So Descartes posits, and I'm not going to try and do this in either Latin or French, but Descartes posits, you know, I think, therefore I am. I think, therefore I am. I mean, there's almost nothing in that sentence which is correct, and yet it has dominated Western philosophy, God knows how many years. You see, I am sitting on a chair, I am thinking, it is raining. They all posit the same mistake. Rain happens, sitting on a chair happens, thinking happens.
Don't some Aboriginal languages have a grammar structure that would be more in line with what you're talking about?
I don't know, it's
I'm
quite
not sure, but
possible.
something vaguely in mind,
Yeah.
I remember they might do.
I've certainly heard it posited by anthropologists that kind of, that, you know, certain tribal societies have a, you know, the sense of I in the way that we're talking about
It's
it
not
here
strong.
is embedded in their culture to a much, much lesser degree.
Yeah.
But it's not nearly so strong. And
They
that
might
well
actually say
be-
things like rain is, in their language, it would be rain is happening.
Yeah,
I'm not
Yeah.
sure.
yeah.
It's a lot of
And in a sense, it doesn't matter, it's just language. But in another sense, every, you know, it's almost like every sentence we speak is reinforcing the view of separation in the same way that all our philosophies do, all our religions do, all our spiritual paths do, even our psychotherapeutic paths do that. Yeah. But you see, to suggest that what happens is simply what happens is an outrage in a way to so many of our beliefs. Because our beliefs are posited mostly on the idea that's not the case. Because they're posited on that central belief that I am an active participant in something called my life. And to suggest that what happens is simply what happens is taken as heresy. I mean, it destroys almost all religion in one blow. makes it nonsense, just in one word, because almost all religion is about, in some way or other, is about my ability to achieve some kind of personal salvation, however widely you want to interpret that. So this is an insult to all of that, all of those stories of human endeavour.
I did mention something like this. I'm seeing a therapist at the moment, and I stupidly did say that, something like this to her. And she looked at me with aghast
Yes,
and genuinely concerned.
yes,
And I wish I hadn't said the thing.
yeah,
And I can't go back now and say that I didn't say it.
yes,
But like everything now that our dialogue is taking place is with this thing in her head.
yeah,
Does he really think he's not there? Or does he think there's a possibility of not being there?
yes,
It's killing me in that sense.
yes. It's very
really
unfortunate.
well. Maybe if you're being judgmental, maybe like
I don't know. She's a meditator as well, but she
Ooh.
You shrink.
I was a very dedicated meditator for 30 years, and I mean that went with some very, very heavy spiritual stories. And I have to say, actually, looking back, quite fascistic spiritual stories. I was quite a sort of spiritual Nazi in my own way. Well, yeah. So of course, I mean, if that psychotherapist has no handle on this at all, probably the sort of alarm bells that may be going off in here is disassociation, borderline.
She didn't think it was that. She said, well, that's existentialism, and she mentioned Sartre and being in nothingness. That was her first thing.
Well, what's wrong with that? Does she not like existentialism?
Well, I was trying to say it wasn't existentialism,
Yeah.
but anyway, but it's a shame. I wish I hadn't mentioned it, only
Yeah.
because I was getting on really well with her. And, it was,
Yeah.
and now I'm
Maybe
just,
it's time to change it.
Yeah. I mean, if you've got any handle on this stuff in any way whatsoever, you know, and you kind of take it seriously in any way whatsoever, and you're in therapy, it is a great blessing if your therapist is also open to this, because otherwise they are likely to hear so much of what you say in a very mistaken way. And I mean, if the worst she thinks is that you may be into existentialism, that's a lot better than what she could be thinking, which is, hello, you know, bipolar, psychosis, disassociation, but who knows what personality disorder, who knows
Yeah.
what.
I think she didn't think it was any of those things because I wasn't displaying any kind of
Yeah.
possible symptoms of.
You probably
things like
come
that.
across as pretty grounded and sane.
That's what she thought. And
Yeah.
so you seem quite normal.
Yeah. Well, so much, I mean, so much for permission to be from a therapist. You know,
Yeah.
Were you condemning meditation then?
No, absolutely not. My God, no.
You weren't saying no meditate, you're not saying...
No, I did meditation I meditated for 30 years.
You said it came with a lot of fascistic...
No, that was honest. I have to own the fact. Yeah, I was also involved in guru stories and transpersonal stories. I mean, I did a lot of kind of spiritually orientated personal development workshops of a very hardcore kind. I mean, this was, you know, a few years ago, and you know, there was a kind of sort of bit of an SAS Gestapo attitude to sort of spiritual, personal, like, you know, you had these blocks, you had to bloody well go through them, whatever it took. You know, I sort of did these sort of courses where you got about 3 hours of sleep every night for about 8 nights, and, you know, they kind of, you know, you were torn to shreds in front of groups of people and then put back together again with lots of transpersonal love. And it was very heavy stuff. It was lovely. It was really, really fun. And very painful as well, but great fun. And it's that I was referring to when I said I was a bit of a spiritual fascist. You know, I sort of took on a lot of the beliefs around these stories, which kind of tend to you know, hang around some of the sort of meditation groups I was in. No, I think meditation is great. If you, for those who find it great, obviously, I mean, meditation can be torture for some people, in which case it might be best avoided. But no, I did it for 30 years. Great. I think it can have profound therapeutic benefit. I'm choosing my words very, very carefully. Profound therapeutic benefits it can have for some people. And I would say that is the same for many practices or techniques or doings or activities. I have to be very careful here because people are so keen now saying this isn't a practice. You know, they offer you a practice. It's not a practice because practices are now not a bad name. But if you take, for example, you know, the multifarious forms of meditation, you take mindfulness, which also comes in multifarious forms, self-inquiry, which is, you know, obviously hugely popular now, particularly in the non-dual community, if there is such a thing as ever. I would say the same thing about all of those. All of those can have some therapeutic benefit for some people.
But none of them can lead you any closer to a realisation of having some freedom.
Of course not. Well, having some freedom, sorry, you kind of afraid. A realisation of having some freedom, yes, they may be, but to a realisation of what we're talking about here, which is the only freedom that matters, of course not. Because that can have nothing to do with who I think I am as a person. But that doesn't invalidate them.
But there would be no one to choose to do that.
Absolutely, of course, that's also absolutely true, yeah.
No self
course.
to inquire.
So,
No self to inquire.
no, but if self-inquiry happens, it happens, and it may have some therapeutic benefit. I mean, my own feeling, and I give you this opinion from a position of quite deep ignorance, but my own feeling is that the benefits of self-inquiry therapeutically are probably fairly temporary. They can probably be extended with some hard work. I think maybe the same about mindfulness. I mean, a lot of practitioners of mindfulness will own up to the fact that mindfulness can be fucking difficult. I read a very honest letter in a psychotherapy magazine from a psychotherapist who used mindfulness with her clients, and she'd been practicing it for 8 years, and this is what the letter was about. She was owning up to the fact that, never mind what they tell the clients, you know, mindfulness is not an easy practice. For most people anyway who do it, but nevertheless it can have therapeutic benefits. I'm a very lazy person, so I did two very lazy forms of meditation. I thought they were great. And none of this matters remotely, because exactly what you just said. I mean, this happens or it doesn't. And if you want to make that slightly more personal, what that means is either an energy arises to do something or it doesn't. And why it does that or why it doesn't do that is a total mystery. One year I can remember having a conversation with an ex-student of mine mocking meditation, and the next year I was a fanatical meditator. Yeah. What's that about? It's not about anything. It's just what happens. Yeah. Which is that the feeling of free will is very strong. The feeling of existing is very strong. Yeah. There's a philosopher, Galen Strawson, and he sort of puts this really overtly and very, very simply. He says, I know there is no possibility of my having free will, but when I walk down the street, I cannot feel that. So you're expressing a dilemma that many characters feel.
I guess I'm just wondering what the next step in that is.
No, there is no step. It'll go on, or it won't. If it doesn't, something else will happen. None of that will have anything to do with who you think you are as a person.
What do you mean?
In the story of time, what you're talking about will go on happening, or it'll stop happening, and if it stops happening, something else will happen. And what's sitting there, if you like, the energy system that's sitting there, may have thoughts going on, I have some control over that, I have some choices I can make about that, I could be less attracted to cake and more attracted to getting up earlier. I mean, that's all a very natural thought stream, and all I'm saying is it's very natural and it's illusory. What happens is what happens. And the one who feels himself to be a person feels like they are at least partly the causation of that.
By attentions.
Feels that they are at least partly the causation of that. And that's simply another thought or feeling that arises.
It's still there, though, that feeling, if I were better, if I
Yes.
were a good person, then I would
Yeah.
be doing all the things I want.
So you like to beat yourself up.
I think so.
Yeah. And that will also go on until it stops. Yeah.
There's no guarantee that will stop, though, is there?
No, there's an absolute guarantee it will stop. Definitely, yeah, definitely. You won't be beating yourself up, and that physical organism is lying in its coffin.
But that's the problem. There's no, the fear is that I'll wake up and I'll be 60 and I'll still have been, I had spent a lifetime being 2 weeks away from living my life. In 2 weeks, that's when I'll wake up. In 2 weeks, that's when I'll, continue writing that book. And that's the fear that what is happening now won't change.
So it sounds like you are into oughts and shoulds
Yes.
and musts, which are pretty much a guarantee of a rather stressful way of being, for obvious reasons. The more, almost every psychotherapist would recognise this, the more oughts, shoulds and musts I have in the skull of mine, the less content or happy I tend to be, the more stressful life tends to be. And even just sort of realising that on a kind of, let's call this an intellectual level, just even understanding that, it's possible that you might be able to wear that more lightly. And in other words, not beat yourself up so much for not getting up in the world. That's possible that may happen.
Yes. It doesn't feel like, it feels like there's just an entire universe of oughts and shoulds.
Yeah.
About me, about everyone else, just constant judgment. They're wrong, they should be doing better, I should be doing better.
Yeah.
It isn't true, but it's like when the inner dialogue is going, if you stop drumming, you're a bad person. If you're not trying, you're a bad person. If these people aren't doing that, they're a bad person. And that's just constant to a degree. If I think about too much, I find myself disliking everyone I've ever met.
Yeah.
It's very frustrating.
But I'm speaking kind of like psychologically here at this point. The fact that you are sitting there saying that, the fact that you've recognised that about yourself, puts you on one side of an enormous chasm. Most people are on the other side, because most people are going ought, should, must about themselves, beating themselves up, and ought, should, must about other people, beating other people up, constantly. And they have absolutely no consciousness of that whatsoever, no awareness of that whatsoever. And you're standing on the other side of what probably looks like a very tiny gap, but is actually a huge chasm. The beginnings of psychological sophistication. There is a clear kind of line, if you like, between complete psychological naivety and the beginnings of psychological sophistication. And that line is the realisation that the way I see life may not be the way life is. So on this side of the line, complete psychological naivety, I and millions of other people are assuming that life really is the way I see it. So, when I go into a bar and somebody looks at me threateningly, I think, I never question that fact. I assume, because I think they're looking at me threateningly, they must be looking at me threateningly. Maybe then I start a fight. I have no concept of the fact that I might be projecting stuff, that the state I'm in makes me see things differently. Total psychological naivety, a millimetre away from that, and yet also in a way the other side of a vast chasm, is the beginning of psychological sophistication, which is to recognise that the way the world appears to me, particularly the world of other people, may not be how it is. And you're on the other side, you're on the psychologically sophisticated side, because you recognise that these oughts, shoulds and musts are something that in a way are happening, and there's a different possibility. On the psychologically naive side of the chasm, there's just the assumption that I should be doing this, I must be doing this, I ought to be doing this, and you should be doing this, is just the natural way that the universe is constructed. So, I'm sorry, that's all a bit, we're getting towards the end of the afternoon, and that's all a bit psychological, but
Yes.
there you go, that's what happens
I
sometimes.
was quite touched last week when you spoke about the whole history of the spiritual development, and at the end you said, and none of it is of any more significance than last night's dream.
Yeah,
That's what you said. So what you've been describing again is it's of no significance
absolutely,
whatsoever,
of course not, of course not.
in as much as there isn't anyone doing it.
Yeah.
Hate to put a spanner in the works, but
Well,
that's what I've been sitting with while you've been talking and
Yeah.
going into the psychoanalytic
Yeah.
side of things.
Yeah. You're not putting a spanner in the works, absolutely. You
Oh, I
are
didn't.
reminding us,
Yeah, I didn't say it, did I?
but you are reminding us of absolutely what is the case, yeah. Sometimes an energy comes up to talk about things from a kind of psychological point of view. And sometimes, usually it doesn't, and sometimes it does. And of course, exactly what you say, none of it has any more significance than that. Never mind last night's dream. Psychotherapists might find last night's dream hugely significant. None of it has any more significance than the movement of this hand. Yeah. The beauty of everything in a way is that none of it has any significance, because it doesn't need to. Usually what I say at this point is none of it has any meaning, because it doesn't need to. We could equally say none of it has any significance. It simply is. By the way, I suppose a lot of stress is generated by us, a great deal of stress is generated by us trying to know the unknowable. I mean, no matter how ludicrous that very phrase sounds, you know, to know the unknowable, that this is what we believe we can do. We believe we can know, if not know the mind of God, we can at least know what God's intentions are for us. We can know what she wants for us. We can know on what terms she will offer us salvation, etc., etc., etc. We torture ourselves in a way. One of the things that, persons are brilliant at self-torture. We can think up so many different ways of self-torture. I referred earlier to like being a member of Opus Dei and wearing a spiked garter, but that is such an obvious thing to do. It's such a simple way to torture ourselves. We're far more sophisticated than that. We torture ourselves in innumerable ways, and at the core of a lot of them is the attempt to know the unknowable, no matter how obviously ludicrous that is. And it's way past 5 o'clock, I'm sure. It's at least a minute past. So we shall end there. So thank you.
Thank you.